So hello and welcome everybody to today's lecture. And my name is Johan Namar, and with me I have
Omid Moalami.
And as Nana just told us, we will go over the Swedish migration laws, and we will try to do it in a way so everybody can understand. And if you have any questions, you can just write them in the comment section, and Nana will keep track of them. But firstly, we of course want to explain who we are. So my name is Johan Namar, and I'm in Swedish biträdande jurist, which means associate lawyer, here as Lewis Langley and Partners law firm. And I'm specialized within migration law, and I'm especially working with work permits. I'm also specialized within criminal cases and compulsory care of young person cases, and also labor law. And Omid, you can explain more about yourself.
So in Swedish, I am what is called advokat, and I am specialized in migration law, and especially in asylum cases, those who seek refuge in Sweden. But I also work with criminal cases if someone a crime has happened to them or if they are accused of a crime. And me and Johan work together at the mentioned law firm Lewis Langley and Partners.
So what we will be discussing today is the following topics. So first, we will give you a short overview of the Swedish migration law and more about the system of the law, the process itself. And then Omid will be talking about the rules about moving to a family member in Sweden. I will then talk about work permit and the changes in the work permit rules. After that, Omid will talk about asylum and seeking asylum in Sweden. Then we will talk about moving from another EU country to Sweden. And lastly, we will talk about resident permit for studies in Sweden. And we will take up questions at the end of each topic. So you can just write them in the comment section, and we will try to answer some of them at the end of each topic, but we might not be able to answer every question. Also, as Nana told you, we cannot give any individual consultation. We can just answer general questions. I hope that's all right with you.
All right.
So, to the Swedish migration law and the basic principles of the law. We have here on the right side kind of a pyramid scheme, not a pyramid scheme, but a pyramid of the law itself, where you can see that the law is first based of international treaties. That can be the European Convention of Human Rights or other kind of international treaties. I will now mute one of you, thank you. And after that, we also have the EU law, because many different regulations in Sweden are actually based on the principles of the EU law. So since Sweden joined the EU in, I think it was 1995, I was not too old at that time, but the Swedish migration law is based on the EU law. Then we have the Swedish law, and the most important is the Swedish Aliens Act, which is called Utlänningslagen in Swedish. Some of you might be familiar with that. And then after that, we have the Aliens Ordinance Act, which is Utlänningsförordningen in Swedish. And when all of this law has been, when you read all of this law, then someone has to interpret this, and that is the migration agency, but it's also the courts in Sweden. That's what we call case law, because everything is not written in the law itself, because the law develops in the different courts. And here you have a picture of the administrative levels, the different courts in Sweden. So an application will firstly be submitted to the migration agency, and they will make a decision on that application. Then, if you appeal, it will go to the migration court. And the migration court will look at the whole case. So they will make an assessment on how to to make a decision in the law, in the specific case, and it's the migration court that will give you a full overview of your case if you appeal the case. Of course, we hope that nobody has to go further than the migration agency, but sometimes that's needed. Then we have the migration court of appeal. So if a decision is rejected, if an application is rejected in the migration court, you can appeal to the migration court of appeal. Now that's a special kind of court. It is not the same kind of court as the migration courts, because you will need a trial permit to get your case tried in the migration court of appeal. And a trial permit you can get in some special situations. It might be so that the court has to make a decision in your case to further give guidance to the court below them and to the migration agency, or that there are other special reasons. I think that less than 1% of all appeals in the migration court of appeal actually gets a trial permit. So that is kind of a last chance to go there, and it's not every case that's going to be tried. So the most important levels in most applications are the migration agency, followed by the migration court. And then to the regular process when applying for a permit or any kind of migration related matter, for example, a citizenship or the right of residence. Then you apply to the migration agency, and that's the first step. Then you have a process at the migration agency. Usually it takes some months, even years in some cases. And then you get a decision. If you get your application granted, then that's good for you and we will congratulate you. If you get a rejection, then you can appeal to the migration court. The migration court will then look at the whole case before they make a decision. Then, if you get a rejection once again, you can appeal to the migration court of appeal. And when they make a decision, either to give you a trial permit or not, and if you get a trial permit, when they give the verdict in your case, when they give the judgment, then the decision is final. And when the decision is final, it goes into what we call legal force, which means you can no longer appeal it. And this is an important matter, because when you have legal force of a decision, you cannot do anything more about it. Then you have to apply again, and it might have some serious effects on your right to live in Sweden, your right to be in Sweden. And legal force can also come into action if you do not appeal. So if you get a rejection in the migration agency or in the migration court, and you do not appeal within the prescribed time, then your decision will go into legal force. And this is important to remember. Can the one listening to music please mute themselves? And then we have the first subject, which Umid will be talking about.
Yes, so family reunification, what is that? Someone living, working in Sweden who might have family members in their home country, who he or she wants them to reunite with them in Sweden, can apply for something called family reunification. And now I'm going to talk a bit about the basics of family reunification, what you need to know, and what the requirements are. So, who are the circle of people that these rules are applicable for? So, we have the referent, whom is the person living in Sweden who applies for the family member to come here and live with them. And this family member needs to have either permanent resident permit or a temporary permit, but with well-founded prospects of obtaining a permanent residency, or of course Swedish citizenship. And then as to any rules, we have some special cases, and we're not going to go into those today, but there are some special circumstances if you have been living together outside of Sweden for a very long time. But that is something you need to look at case to case, and it's hard to give general information about. Then we have the applicant, which is the person applying to come to Sweden. And in accordance with the Alien Act, it is mainly the core family who can apply for family reunion, which is someone's husband, wife, or partner. It is also unmarried children under the age of 18 years old. And we also have parents either living with the child or parents who might not have custody of the child, but wants to exercise the right of visitation. And then these are what we call core family members. Then there is also a possibility for someone to apply for family reunification whom is not included in this core family, but it requires very special dependency in that relationship, and it is very special circumstances, and it is very hard to obtain a permit on that ground. Thank you. So what are the requirements for being granted this sort of permit? So some of the more important one is that the referent, the person living in Sweden whom wants to bring their family member over here, needs to have enough monthly income to support him or herself and all the family members who are going to live in the same household, as well as to pay for the living expenses. And this income needs to be a regular income over a period of time. So for instance, on-call employment is not enough. So in the employment contract, basically, it needs to be decided how many hours that the person is going to work, so that the migration agency very clearly can see how much income you will have, basically. Then, of course, the referent in Sweden needs to have a home of enough size, and this also depends on how many family members, how many children are living in that household. And even non-family members can be calculated in this calculation. And if someone doesn't own the house, if they are renting, then they need to have a contract for at least 1 year to come from the date of when the migration agency looks at the case. So it's not enough if it is a 1-year contract when you apply, because the migration agency might look at the case after 6 or 7 months. And at that time, it will be too short of a period of time. Let's see if there was something else here. No, I think that was it. Do we have any sort of questions about?
Let's
Okay,
see in
maybe
the
we can
chat. I
check
will bring the
here.
chat up here.
Anyone who has questions in regards to family reunification?
We check the chat.
So there is one question regarding work permit, and I think we will go over to work permit, so a question might be answered
Later on.
later on. I cannot see any questions.
We have 2 new questions. How much? Okay. Does one have to show? To show employment, does one have to show advertisement for the employment, including an employment contract? So in regards to family reunification cases, to show what income you have to the migration agency, you show this with an employment contract. And you can also prove this with salary, with pay slips for a period of time, to show that the income has been the same over a period of time. If the income, if the pay, if the salary is increased after you have the contract, you can also get some sort of letter from the employer certifying the new salary. So those are the ways that you can prove what sort of salary you have, and so on. Then we also had another question: how much is enough income to qualify, and also how big of a space. As I said, this all depends on the size of the family, how many children, so it's not possible to say in general. But what I can say is that on the migration agency's website, you have all of this information in detail, I would say, and it says based on how many family members and how many children, but this depends from family to family.
I just want to go back to this, how you can show your income. You can also, of course, contact the Swedish tax agency and try to obtain your income statements to show that you, for a period of time, maybe for 3 or 4 years, have had one income every month. We had a question about how do we base that with parents? I think the one asking that questions have to explain further what they mean.
Then we have a question: what is considered as a special dependency relationship? So, as I said, it is very hard to prove that, and it's not an easy application. But in general, one could say that you need to prove that the referent, the person living in Sweden, or the person abroad are depending on each other for both economical reasons, but also just the day-to-day sort of help, living condition, that they are completely depending on each other and that they cannot live without each other. And one could say that if you have been able to live without each other for a very long period of time, then that is usually an indication that this sort of special dependency does not exist in the view of the migration agency. Let's see, how long does it usually take? You will receive, if you get this sort of permit, you often receive a 2-year permit. It can be extended for another 2 years, and after 4 years you can have a permanent one. But in regards to how long it takes, it's very hard to say. Before they make a decision in these cases, usually they need to have an interview with both parties, so with the referent and the applicant, and it depends country to country and the migration agency's workload, but I would say at least between 1 to 2 years. It's a normal amount of time it can take. The migration court of appeals, can one apply?
So here is a question regarding the process. So it's from the pictures we had before. So after the migration court of appeal and they do not grant the application, can one apply for new circumstances, enforcement to obstacles? So I understand this question as being about if one have a decision of expulsion, is there any possibility to get your case tried before this decision of expulsion expires, which is in 4 years right now? And
maybe we can get back to that under the asylum section.
I think we can, we can do that because that's kind of a special situation.
Yeah. We can take one more question, I think, before we move on, perhaps. But
I think some people have raised their hands instead of writing in the chat. So maybe we encourage them to, can I
would you like to? Okay.
Yes, we just encourage people to write questions
so
in the chat.
If you have questions in the other sections, please do write a message, because that is the easiest way for us to be able to respond to you.
So we will not be able to unmute you and let you take the question orally. Rather, it's better that you write in the comment section.
We have a lot of questions here, but
if it's regarding the topic.
parents
That we
considered
can
for
take
close
it.
family reunion. So we have a question, the final question in this section. Are parents considered for close family reunion? So if I understand the question correctly, I think the one asking wants to know, are they considered the core family of what the migration agency says? And core family, if you are under the age of 18, then your parents are considered your core family, and the regulation allows an application for family reunion. But if the referent are above the age of 18 and you want to bring your parents over here, then you are not considered as core family, and then you have to fulfill the criteria of what was it called?
Special dependency.
Yeah, special dependency, exactly. So unfortunately, for every adult wishing to bring their parents, that is unfortunately very hard in Sweden.
And there are a lot of questions regarding work permit and long-term residency. I think you might get the answer soon enough during this lecture.
And maybe if not, ask those questions under those sections when we get to them.
Yeah, and that's great. So next is work permit, which is a residence permit because of a specific job in Sweden. And shortly about the process for a work permit. The employer starts the process by advertising that they need to hire someone within a specific job on what is called Platsbanken in Swedish. And this is the Swedish job board's web service, or Arbetsförmedlingen, as some of you might know it as. And so the employer puts the ad up, and it needs to be up for at least 10 days before they choose to go further with a work offer. A work offer is when they submit an offer through the migration agency system to the applicant or to the employee. And before the work offer comes to the applicant, it will also be submitted to the union for a statement, because the union have the right to say if they think the pay is enough in accordance with Swedish bargaining agreements, meaning the agreements between the unions and the employees. And if everything looks all right, then you can go further and submit the work offer to the applicant, to the one outside of Sweden applying for a work permit. Now, I said it has to be up for 10 days. Of course, it can be good to wait a couple of more days just to be on the shore, just to be sure that you are on the right time of this time limit. Because if the advertisement have not been up for enough time, then you will get a rejection on your application, no regarding what. And then the employee or the applicant will submit the application, which is that they are answering on the work offer, saying that they accept the work offer. They will submit some information regarding previous job history, previous applications to Sweden, address, contact information in the country where they live at this time, and so on. You can also add information regarding your education and so on, because some jobs you need to be qualified for them by having an education. This is the part where you can submit that. Then the migration agency will start processing your application. It is very hard to say how long it will take. It can take all between maybe 3 months up to over a year. It depends on where you're from, what kind of job it is, if you have a full application, or if you have to do any additions, if the migration agency has to ask you to submit more information. That's why we have been writing potential additions here, because many times people forget to add everything that's important, and then the process will take longer time. So if you, instead of rushing the application, very thoroughly go over everything and see that you submit everything at once, you maximize your chances of getting a faster decision. And then we have the main requirements. And I just want to, before going into this, say that there are many requirements and many things that both the applicant and the employer needs to do when it comes to a work permit. But these are some of these, and these are the most important ones that you need to be sure of when you apply for a work permit. So first of all, you need a salary and other conditions, mostly insurances that are in accordance with the collective agreement. So even if the employer does not have a collective agreement with the union, they still need to offer you as an applicant the same kind of pay and also insurances as if you were in the union. You also need, and this is the most recent change in the Swedish migration law, you need a salary of at least 80% of the latest published medium salary in Sweden. Now, on the right side here, you can see what the medium salary is in Sweden and when it was published. I understand that this can be a bit confusing for every one of you, but what we see on the first column is that is the date of the publication. So the date of the publication is what regulates which pay you need. So if you apply, for example, after the 20th of June this year, then you need 80% of the pay that was published on that day. I think it's some problem in the meeting right now because I have to accept people that want to come into the meeting, just so you know. But right now, the medium salary is 24,200. You don't need to be offered a pay of this amount, but you need 80% of that, which today equals 27,360. And then if you applied before and you're still waiting on a decision, you need to see which was the latest published salary when you applied. In addition to that, you also need a signed employment agreement. This is also one of the latest changes regarding work permits. It was not like that before, but you need to sign it by hand. So you cannot sign it digitally because the migration agency does not accept it. So even if it's, you can do that in accordance with the labor law, but now it is what do the migration agency think about this, because you want your applications to go as smoothly as possible. And then you need to sign by hand, and also your employer needs to sign by hand. And then you submit a copy of the signed employment agreement to the migration agency. As I told you, your employer needs to show that they will have insurance covering you as an employee, which is health insurance, life insurance, employment insurance, and pension insurance. It can also be called occupational damage insurance in some it depends on the insurance company. So it's really important to have the right insurances. Of course, you need a valid passport, and the passport needs to be valid for as long as the permit. So if you are applying for a 2-year permit, which is the most common application, then you need a passport that is valid for at least 2 years from the day when the decision is made. So if you have a passport for only 1.5 years, you cannot get a permit that is longer than 1.5 years. And if you have a family member that's applying together with you, there is also a maintenance requirement, which Umi talked about before when we talked about an application for a family member. So the maintenance requirement is basically the same. You can see that it changes every year, so it goes up or down depending on how the economy is going. I think for 2 adults, right now it's around 9,500 that you need to show that you have. Plus, you also need to show that you can pay rent if you are renting an apartment, or other expenses you have if you are owning your own apartment. So you combine them, and then you know what kind of salary you need after tax. This is important. It is after tax, not before tax. And you need to show that you will get this every month. So it's not enough that you maybe have some extra money coming in 1 month. You need to show that this is what you will have every month. But there is not a home requirement. And when I say a home requirement, you still need to be able to show that you can pay for your living expenses, but there is not a requirement as to how many rooms you need or the standard of the home itself.
Before we move on, I could just add that in regards to passport, also in family reunification cases, the applicant of course needs to have a valid passport and at least 2 years time left, because otherwise the permit that the migration agency grants will be less than 2 years. So this is something that's important there as well.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight that having a valid passport that you have obtained in the right way in accordance with the law of your country is maybe one of the most important things when it comes to all applications, not only work permit and family members, all applications. Because I have sometimes had problems in applications where someone had previously submitted one passport, maybe with one spelling of the name or one day of birth, and then they submit another passport where the spelling is different or the date of birth is different. This is a big problem, and you want to avoid that because that can make it very hard for you to get any kind of permit in Sweden. So when you submit the passport, please make sure that it has been obtained in the right way in accordance with what the law in your country says.
And we could also add in this section that both in work permits and family reunification cases and most permits basically you apply from your home country, you need to show your passport at the Swedish embassy before being granted the permit. So if there's any issues with your passport, this is something the migration agency will find out and it will affect the case.
And then we come to when should an application for a work permit be submitted. So you should submit the application before you move to Sweden. So if you want to, if it's a first time application, of course. So you submit the application before you move to Sweden, and it's not recommended to travel to Sweden during this period. Of course, you can do it legally in some ways, but if you are in Sweden, for example, on a tourism visa, and you then submit the application when you are in Sweden, it might be rejected just based on that. Because as a tourist, you are not allowed to start working, you are not allowed to search for the job. And as you remember, there is a rule that the job position has to be advertised, and then that can be interpreted by the migration agency as you going around the rule that you have to, going around the ad itself. So you should apply before you come to Sweden. And then, of course, you have to wait for the decision, get the permit, and then move to Sweden. So you should not move to Sweden before you get the permit. Now, there are other rules that that is applicable for what is called a change of track, which is a work permit application after an asylum case. Can everyone please mute themselves?
There is a question here, three questions actually. And the first question is, as a student with a dependent, if you secure a job that meets the current requirements, how is the process to switch to a work permit? Are you required to leave the country? That's number one. The same person goes further and asks, as a dependent with student who has secured employment which meets the current requirements, can you apply for a work permit to become the main applicant? That's the first question. Yeah,
okay. So we will look at the comment and try to answer as many questions as possible. I just want to highlight before that if you are applying for an extension in Sweden, you have to submit your application before the current permit expires, because if you apply even 1 day after, it will be considered a new application, and then the general rule is that you have to apply from outside of Sweden. And if you are applied before the permit expires, most often, depending on the case, you can stay in Sweden and work during the time that your application is being processed. We also have one more picture, which is important for you to know about, and that is it possible to change employer or job position while in Sweden? So when you get the work permit, it is most often, when you get it at the first time, limited to a specific job at a specific employer, which means you can only work with one job position at one employer. Then sometimes when you apply for extension, you can get a permit that is only restricted or limited to a specific job position. And then, so in situation one, you can change, if you change employer, it requires a new application in full. This is the same for changing the job position. In situation two, you can actually change employer without making a full new application if you change it within the same job position. So if you are working as a construction worker, you can change employer within the same field. So you are still a construction worker with the same title. If it is a change of title, even the slightest, then you should do a full new process. If the job position is going to be changed, you always need to make a full application with all the steps before you start working at the other employer or at the other job. And of course, you have to meet all requirements as before, even at the new job, they are the same. And it is very important for you to know that these are only some of the rules when you change employer or the job position. So there are also other rules or regulation that you and your employer have to follow, for example, to report to the tax agency and so on. But we will not present them in full here because that would take a whole day for us to do. And now we can go over to the questions.
Yes, there was a question here that if it's possible for somebody, especially in the UK, to apply for internship in Sweden. That's number one. And then number two, does the new salary law affect applicants with EU long-term residence permits from another EU country?
Nu ska vi se, jag försöker bara hitta. I'm trying to get the question because this is.
It was two questions. The first one is dealt with. The second one is, does the new salary law affect applicants with EU long-term residence permits from another EU country?
Okay, so this salary requirement is for residence permit based on a specific job, or what we call work permit, but so it is only for residence permit based on a job, so that you have been granted the residence permit because you are going to perform a job in Sweden. So it does not affect other kind of applications.
Then the next one is quite a long one. I will start by I was helping out an individual appeal a case who unfortunately had to leave Sweden just last week. His application for work permit got denied based on the fact that the job he applied for had been advertised via LinkedIn. All efforts to defend the legitimacy of his job failed, despite his employer also intervening. Most job recruiters post job and on various platforms, and LinkedIn is one of them. Kindly help explain why a platform like LinkedIn is not recognized by the migration agency.
Yes, so the advertisement requirement is something that comes from EU law, which basically says that people within the EU must get the possibility to apply for any job before an application of work permit is submitted. And that's why we have the 10-day rules that an advertisement a job needs to be advertised for at least 10 days before an application of work permit is submitted. And the migration agency mostly only accepts advertisements on what is called Arbetsförmedlingen, the job agency, the job agency, because this platform is also shared within EU. So when you advertise there, you meet the criteria that is necessary. But platforms like LinkedIn, Google, other platforms, Facebook, it is hard to prove that the employment has been shared within the whole of EU, or EUAA, it should be said. And because of that, it is very hard to be successful with the work permit application if it's not been advertised there.
Then, can you please repeat that the salaries mentioned are after or before tax?
So we have two questions regarding this salary requirement. The one that is that you need 80% of the medium income of the latest published medium income at the time. That is before tax. So when you say, I think it is 27,360 right now, then that is before tax. But when it comes to the maintenance requirement, meaning the pay you need to be able to support your family, then that requirement is after tax.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned for one person, it is 9,500 something, and then you need to add the cost of living and that. But so it depends on each family, each application, how big of a family, how many children. So please make sure that you check that in every case.
Yeah, so it depends if it is after tax or before tax, but in your contract and the pay offered, then it's before tax. But if it is that you need to show that you are able to support yourself, then it's after tax.
Yeah, somebody is saying that he doesn't think the question on the dependents is answered, which I repeat. As a student with a dependent, if you secure a job that meets the current requirements, how is the process to switch to work permit? Are you required to leave, or are you required to leave the country? They mean that, assuming my husband is here and I'm with a person as a dependent and I get a job, can I switch from being dependent as a student to a work permit?
So we will have the student permit later, and we can bring that question up when we come to that point. I'm just going over the questions, and I will choose one question that we can maybe answer before we go further. Let's see here.
There's quite a lot of them.
Yeah, and this is a big area of the migration law. So I understand you have a lot of questions. It will not be possible for us to answer all of them, because then we will not have time for the other parts.
Is it possible to answer them later by writing and then I share?
Do you mean after this
yes,
presentation?
after the presentations, we can go in to answer them so that people get their questions answered.
I think we shall see how long this presentation takes, but if anyone has questions that it's not answered, they are always welcome to contact us with those. And in the end of this presentation, you will have our contact information where you can contact us. So I think that's probably the best way.
So here is one question. Does the employee apply for the work permit, or the employer does it? And then if we go back, we have the process here. So the employer initiate the process by advertising on Platsbanken. When they have found the person that they want to hire, they submit the work offer. Then the union will give a statement. At that point, the employee then applies. So the applicant or the employee is the one applying, but the employer initiates the process.
One could also add that if you hire a lawyer, such as my good colleague Johan here, then these steps are something that the lawyer can help with, both with the employer and the employee.
I think I can take. We can maybe try to bring one more.
One more.
of the questions, because it was a lot of work permit questions I can
Yeah,
see.
so I think it's, the interest is very much there. So if we could help answer some of them.
There are some student questions, and I think we will answer them later.
That one is answered, I think.
One question, 4 people gave thumb up, which means that it's a question that's who are interested in.
That one might be.
Can we take this one from Comfy iPhone? For one already working in Sweden and needs to renew their permit, what is the maximum time to apply before your current permit expires?
So if I understand correctly, it is when you should apply
At the earliest.
at the earliest, maybe.
Yeah, renewal.
So if you are at the same job and you will stay at the same job with the same employer, then it will be an extension of your current employment and the current work permit. Then you can apply. The migration agency usually wants it maybe 1 month before, but you should not apply, for example, half a year before. So 1 month before could be a good guidance on that. So you are sure that you make the time limit, but you are still not too long away from when the permit expires. I can see that there is some other questions here, and let's see. Regarding the change of job, you of course, when you change a job position, you still need to show that you met all the requirements in accordance with your previous decision. But if you know that when I apply for extension in maybe 1 year, and then the new rule kicks in for me, I need to meet this requirement, you can of course change your job position or employer, but you still need to show when applying for extension that I met the requirements before as well.
If you get married.
Yeah, so if you get married to someone holding a permanent residency and with a good income, will you as the dependent be approved even when you have a low paid job? So if you are applying for a work permit, it is based only on your salary and not your spouse's salary. Then of course, there might be a possibility for you to apply for a family reunification and a permit based on family, but we will not be able to cover the situations when you can kind of change between different kind of permits, because that's a complicated part of the law, which we will not go over today, unfortunately. And I think now we have to move further to the next topic.
Section. So the next section is asylum. What is asylum? What are the criteria, and how do you apply for it? So in this next section, that is what I will be talking about. So asylum, the requirements for asylum, there are two, how you say, either you get refugee status, or you can receive what we'll talk about later, status as a person in need of subsidiary protection. And to obtain refugee status, you need to prove that you have a well-founded fear of persecution on grounds of race, nationality, religious or political beliefs, gender, sexual orientation, or other membership to a social group. And you also need to be able to prove that you are unable to avail yourself to the protection of your home country. And then we have the status of a person in need of subsidiary protection. And then the requirements are that you have a well-founded fear of suffering the death penalty or being subjected to corporal punishment, torture, or other inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, or that you need protection because of external or internal armed conflict, because of other severe conflicts in the country of origin. And you have a well-founded fear of being subjected to serious abuses. And same thing here, you need to, you are unable or unwilling due to the risk to avail yourself to protection in your home country. And what this basically means, you flee your home country because you fear for your life, and this could be for many different reasons, and you cannot receive help in your home country, so the police or the government cannot help you. These sort of cases could be asylum cases, and you can apply for permit in Sweden. But how does one do that? So most applications like work permit, like family reunification, or permit for studies, which we will talk about later, the main rule is that you apply in your home country and you receive the permit before you come to Sweden. But asylum, since you are fleeing your home country and you cannot, this is not something you plan, it is something that just happens, then you cannot apply for asylum in your home country, but you apply for asylum in the country that you're seeking refugee. So if you want to apply for asylum in Sweden, you need to come to Sweden and apply here. So for instance, you cannot apply at the Swedish embassy outside of Sweden. So you come to Sweden and you come into contact with the migration agency and apply for asylum. And it should be said that when you come to Sweden, it is good if you apply for asylum as soon as possible. Although it is understandable if someone who has fled their country is in trauma, is not feeling well, might want time to recover before contacting the Swedish agencies. It is not good to wait with applying asylum, and you should do it as soon as possible entering Sweden. The first meeting with the migration agency as an asylum seeker is a short one where the applicant briefly explains their asylum reasons, if it is political reasons, religious reasons, or others. And very briefly might describe how he or she fled to Sweden. So in what way, through which countries, and so on. And at this first meeting, you could also present the name and contact information of the lawyer you wish to represent your case. It is not necessary. If you do not have a name of a lawyer, one will be appointed to you. And it should also be said that the lawyers in asylum cases are paid for by the Swedish government, so you don't have to pay for a lawyer when you seek asylum. But if you want someone specific who you trust, or who might also speak your language, or you have contact with, it is good to give their contact information to the migration agency when you apply for asylum.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at this step, this is a very delicate matter. It's a very hard process for the asylum seeker. So you might want a lawyer that you feel comfortable with. If it's because of that you know the lawyer, or that you know the same language, or you have the same gender, the reasons doesn't matter. You should always ask for a lawyer that you feel comfortable with, because you are the one that is going to apply. You will go over a hard time. And it can also be good to contact a lawyer before and just get to know them, just shortly talk about your application, and then you can present that lawyer at this point, because later on it will be very hard to change lawyer. This is the chance you have to choose one.
Yeah, it should really be emphasized that when you have been appointed a lawyer, it's very hard to have it changed to another one, and it requires quite a lot. After this first meeting or interview where you seek asylum at the migration agency, a lawyer will be appointed to your case, and then this lawyer will contact you for a personal meeting before the big asylum interview. And the purpose of this meeting is to get to know you, go through your case, and give you information in regards to the asylum interview, what is good for you to know, and what is good that you think of. This meeting is very important because later on you have an asylum interview that minimum can be between 2.5 and 3 hours. And in that meeting, it is mainly the person seeking asylum who has a very active role, who needs to talk about his or her asylum case, asylum reasons. So it's very good that you meet your lawyer prior to the asylum interview, so that you feel prepared. Yeah, unfortunately the printer didn't work, so we don't have all the pages. But yeah, so then you have the asylum interview, and I'm just gonna check. Yeah, we talk more in detail about it in just a second. But then after the meeting with the public counsel, you have the asylum interview, where you will be given the opportunity to talk about your asylum case, and then the migration agency will ask questions based on the information that you tell them. More of this shortly. After the interview, you will have a meeting again with your public counsel. And in that meeting, the public counsel has received a protocol, so basically a copy of everything that has been said during the asylum interview. And the purpose of this meeting is to go through the protocol, make sure that nothing is forgotten, that everything is translated correctly. And also, if one has evidence they would like to submit, it is good to provide this evidence at the latest at this meeting with the lawyer. Because after this meeting, the lawyer will write an asylum plea and submit it along with all the evidence to the migration agency. And after this submission has been made, the migration agency can make a decision in your case. I can also mention in shortly that if you receive a negative decision, as my colleague Johan said, you can appeal it to the migration court. And if you receive also a negative decision there, you can appeal it one more time to the Migration Court of Appeals. And after the Migration Court of Appeals decision, the asylum case is closed. If you have received a deportation, it comes into force, and it is active for 4 years from the date of the Migration Court of Appeals decision.
And I think we actually had a question regarding that before that we will be shortly answering now. Someone asked about if you can submit after a decision of expulsion, can you provide new circumstances?
Exactly. So as I mentioned shortly, when you receive a decision and the decision comes into force, it is active for 4 years. So it means that you cannot seek asylum again in Sweden or another EU country within these 4 years. But during this time in Sweden, you can apply to reopen your asylum case and to stop the deportation. And this is in Swedish called anmälan om verkställighetshinder. To make this application, you need to have new evidence that you haven't provided to the migration agency before, and or new circumstances that you haven't told the migration agency of before, perhaps because they occurred after you came to Sweden, or if you have a reason, an acceptable reason on why you haven't mentioned them before. Every new circumstance, you can only apply for it once. What this means is that if you apply, sorry, please don't forget to mute your microphones. What this means is that if you apply to reopen your case based on something new that has happened in your home country, that you are affected by, and you send in an application and you send in some evidence. If the migration agency denies it, and then both courts also denies it, then you cannot make a new application based on this same circumstance again within these 4 years, because then the migration agency will say that this is not a new circumstance, which is one of the criteria, and they will not review it again. So if you try to reopen your asylum case based on new circumstances, don't rush the application, and make sure that you have evidence to back up your claims, and perhaps even have a meeting with a lawyer and talk about the application you're thinking about, because once it's submitted and decided on, it will not be tried again until after 4 years, when the asylum case is reopened. Then the migration agency might look at those circumstances again. And it should also be mentioned that in these applications, you don't have a public counsel, at least not in the beginning. So when you apply, you either do it yourself, or you hire a lawyer to do it privately for you, and then you have to pay for it yourself. There we go. Yeah. So about the asylum interview, in the beginning, I said I talked about the criteria, and I said that the applicant needs to be able to prove. And the reason I said this is because that in asylum cases, it is the applicant who has the burden of proof. So if you say to the migration agency, I cannot go back because of this and this, then you need to be able to prove this to them. And how you do that is, for instance, through this oral hearing at the migration agency. And it will, in most cases, be conducted like so, that after receiving some information, you will be given the opportunity to talk about your asylum reasons. And this might be the only time that you have an oral hearing. So it's important that you tell the migration agency everything that you want them to review and take into consideration when making the decision. Some people, sometimes they say that they didn't ask me questions about this, so it's not necessary that I tell them, but the migration agency can only ask questions about circumstances that they know of. So if they don't know something specific in your case that you haven't told them, naturally they will not ask questions about it. So it is very important that during this oral hearing, you tell them every circumstance that is important for them to know, so that they can ask relevant questions based on it. During this asylum interview, it is mainly the applicant who speaks and have an active role. The public counsel is present there, but more in a sort of supportive position. As a public counsel, I might ask questions if there are certain parts that you as an applicant have forgotten to tell them about. I help you during the interview, but it is you yourself who need to talk and need to explain your reasons, and not the lawyer. It should also be said that there is an interpreter who will be present at these oral hearings, so it's important not to speak too fast, not to speak in too long sections. It is important that you take brief pauses in between your sentences, so that the interpreter can translate everything to the migration agency who are writing it down. And if one does not understand the interpreter or the questions that the migration agency asks, never guess what they are meaning or answer the question anyway. It is always important to let the migration agency know if you do not understand the question or the interpreter, so that they can clarify it or book another interpreter.
And also it can be said that in the meetings with the public counsel, if the public counsel does not speak your language, for example, you can have an interpreter, for example, in Twi or Akan. So you will be able to talk with your lawyer in your own language. So the interpreter will also be present if you want to in the meetings with the lawyer, of course.
Great. And then, so after the interview, you have the asylum plea, and it is a written legal argumentation written by a lawyer. So that is why it is important after the oral interview, you have the meeting with the lawyer, and at the latest at that meeting, you need to provide the evidence to your lawyer so he or she can submit it along with the asylum plea to the migration agency. This legal plea, the asylum plea, is complementary to the asylum interview. So the most important part is still the interview where the applicant speaks for him or herself. This argumentation is only complementary. Yeah, a few words about applying work permit after asylum. So if one unfortunately is not granted asylum, then under certain circumstances, they can apply for work permit without leaving Sweden, which is called spårbyte, a change of track. And there are some special requirements. We don't have time to go through them all, but the main ones that is important to know is that you must apply at the latest after 2 weeks from when the decision comes into legal force. Even if you apply 1 day too late or a few hours too late, then it is too late, and it can be a reason for rejection. At the time when you apply for work permit, you need to have worked at least 4 months with the same employer with the same position. During these 4 months, you need to have met the salary criteria and other conditions such as insurance and such. You need to have a valid passport. Again, a work permit is granted for 2 years. So when you apply, if you have less than 2 years on your passport, the decision that is made will be for less time than 2 years. And then it's very important to know that if you have a re-entry ban, when the migration agency makes a decision in your asylum case, if it is a negative, they might also sometimes give a re-entry ban, which is in Swedish is called återreseförbud. And if you have this, then it could mean that you will not be granted a work permit. Re-entry ban is very hard to have revoked, so have that in mind. Yeah, do we have some questions about asylum, perhaps? Let's see.
The questions we have
three questions here.
yes.
Long-term residency will come later, and I don't think we will go into all the details, just so you know.
And our contact information will come in the end as well.
To have a child can be in circumstances. Child ID and passport have been submitted before the migration.
So if one has an expulsion decision, under certain circumstances, one can apply to obtain a permit based on family reunification within of Sweden. It is very special circumstances that is required, since the main rule is that you must apply from your home country and not within Sweden. And then I think in the question it said something about, was it ID? Yeah, if you haven't been able to provide passport before, this could be a new circumstance, but again, there are other circumstances that need to be met. So it is just that you have a new passport is not a guarantee that you will obtain the permit from within of Sweden.
Regarding the benefits of asylum seeker, like healthcare and schooling, for example, I think that is not something we can answer today, unfortunately, because that's not the part of the asylum process itself. It's more about other fields of law. And
when you seek asylum, these sort of administrative questions, you can always get answered from the migration agencies, mottagningskontor, as they are called.
Yeah. So, for example, here in Stockholm, that is in Sundbyberg,
Yeah.
and there is in other places in Sweden, like Malmö and Uppsala. Student, we will get back to that later.
Can a re-entry ban be appealed? So if you have sought asylum, you get an expulsion, you get a re-entry ban, and you try to apply work permit within 2 weeks after it comes into force, then of course you can argue again about the re-entry ban and try to have it revoked, but it is extremely hard. And if you do not have new circumstances, if the circumstances are the same when the asylum case was in court or with the migration agency, then there's a big risk that your appeal in regards to the re-entry ban will not be successful in the work permit case. So you need to have something new, and even if you have so, it's going to be very hard.
Can you talk about moving from another EU country? You know what, I think we actually can. So
nice transition.
So moving within the European Union, the EU, that is the next part. And before we start, I will say that this is a very big field of law. This is it can be easy, it can also be very complicated depending on the situation. So we will not give you all the answers today that you might want to get answered, because every situation is different. So we will just give you the general principles and the general possibilities. Then there are many exceptions, many rules, many cases to look at to know how the situation is in every individual case.
I think we will need to do a second session of this, because a lot of people couldn't come on. We only have 100 people.
We will see if it's possible in the future to bring up other questions. But to move within the European Union, I will talk about status as a long-term resident of a EU country, because that is one of the ways that you can use to move within the European Union. And this is a special status that is possible to obtain in most of the EU member states. Not all of them. For example, Denmark is not taking part in this. And it is a status that can make it easier for you to move within the European Union as a worker, though it's still important that you are informed on both national and EU law. And now I choose to say as a worker, because that is the most common ground while moving around within Europe as a person with status as a long-term resident. There are other grounds that you can use to obtain this status, and also to move around within Europe, but that's not the most common ways. I will not speak about that too much. It is important that if you believe you have the status as a long-term resident, it needs to be showing on your residence permit card in the national language in the country where you have this status. In Swedish, that is ställning som varaktigt bosatt. And then you have on the right side some examples. For example, in Cyprus, you can see it's in English, so it's long-term resident. In Spain, it's residente de la larga duración. So, for example, you might have seen this in both Spanish and Italian or Greek example. For example, so it's so it's very important that it actually shows on your card. Because if it does not say this, then you cannot prove for the Swedish Migration Agency that you have this status. And the status as a long-term resident, you have it in one EU state, in a particular EU state, and it might actually be lost at some point if you are living outside of the European Union for too long. But you can also lose it in that country if you live in another EU country for too long. So that is something you need to make sure of, that you don't want to lose this status in the country, who gave it to you. Then you can, of course, become a long-term resident of another EU state, for example, in Sweden, and then you need to meet some requirements. And the main requirements to become a long-term resident in Sweden, and thus you will also get a permanent residency in Sweden, because according to the Swedish law, if you become a long-term resident, you do also have the status or a permit that is permanent. And the requirement is that you have lived in Sweden continuously for 5 years in a row or more. Of course, during this time, you need to have been living in Sweden on a legal basis. So, for example, that you had a residence permit or other legal grounds. And I think we will come back to that later. So if you have questions regarding that, you might get them answered soon. So, for example, if you have been in Sweden illegally or in Sweden and then left Sweden, then that's not 5 years continuously. You also need to be able to support yourself and your family. And then most often you do that as an employee or a business owner. Then you can think about the same kind of evidence we talked about before. So it's agreements, employment agreements, it's pay slips, it's income statements that you can use to show that you are able to support yourself. There is also a level you have to meet. You need a pay of a certain amount. I will not give it to you today, but it is not actually the same as the one we discussed earlier. It is a different kind of maintenance requirement. So you can see that this kind of requirement is not always the same. They are alike, but not the same. And then it is after tax. When it comes to supporting yourself and your family, it is always after tax, not before tax, because the tax can be different in different cities in Sweden. And there are rules on how to calculate the living time in Sweden. We will not go over all of them today, but it is important to know that not all time in Sweden counts. Some permit does not count because they are not for living, they are only temporary. And if you leave Sweden for a long period of time, even if it is to work in another country for a Swedish company, that might constitute a break of the time you have been living continuously in Sweden. So if you are away from Sweden for too long, you might not be able to get status as long-term resident in Sweden. And then this comes into question if you will also lose your status in the country where you had your previous status as a long-term resident. That's why it's important to see, when will I lose this status? Will I not lose it? Because if you do not get the status in Sweden, you might want it in the other countries so you can stay in the European Union, of course. And to move to Sweden as a long-term resident, you have the status in the other EU state, then it is possible to move to Sweden when you have that status. And then you need, of course, to meet some requirements. It is also possible to bring your family, but they need to submit their own separate applications. And your family can both be someone who is living with you currently or someone who is in your home country, for example. The situation is kind of different in those, of course, how you apply and when you apply, but you have the possibility to bring them if you meet some requirements. The most common ground to move to Sweden is as a worker, someone working in Sweden, someone who is employed in Sweden. And then, of course, you need an employment agreement and you need an actual job that you can show evidence of that you have and that you get paid from that job. There are other possibilities to move to Sweden as a long-term resident, for example, for studies. Then there might be other requirements such as having insurance and so on. Maybe you have a lot of money and you can support yourself that way. I will not go over all of these and all the requirements because that would be a very long period of time. I think we have 2 minutes left, but we will prolong that for a while so that we do all of the steps for today. But it's important that you know about this and then you can look into it further on your own, or of course consult a lawyer. Now, as I said before, you need to have been living legally in Sweden, and you can have a permit, but you can also have what is called right of residence. And right of residence is not a permit. It is not something that you apply for and then you get for 5 years. You have the right of residence if you have it. Basically, that's it. And if you lose it, you lose it. And then there are, of course, rules regulating when you can still keep it. But so it's not a permit, it's a right. It's a right you have at the point when you meet the requirements. But then it also means you can lose it even if you have a residence, a card showing the right of residence. The card can be valid for 5 years. That does not mean that you have the right of residence for 5 years. It only means that at the point when you receive the card, you met the requirements, but you need to continue to meet the requirement continuously. So the right of residence is when an EU citizen moves to another country within the EU, and then they can have the right of residence, meaning they can stay longer than 3 months in that country. They can live in that country. The most common ground for an EU citizen to receive the right of residence is that they are either a worker with working for a Swedish company or for an employer in Sweden, or they are self-employed in the other EU country. Now we are talking about Sweden, so then they are self-employed in Sweden. There are also other options, such as being a student and having sufficient means, maybe saved money. Then as well, there is a question regarding insurances and so on, and I will not go into that today because it's a big area of law. It is important, of course, that you are able to prove everything. The one who is a citizen of, for example, Italy, who moves to Sweden needs to prove that they are actually working in Sweden. So you cannot just say it, you have to prove it. But you have the right if you meet the requirements, and as long as you meet the requirements. And then the family member of the EU citizen can also have a right of residence. This is called a derived right of residence. So you have it because your family member has the right of residence, then you also have it. So, and family members, that is partners, such as spouse, cohabiting partner, or registered partner. Now, not too many countries use as registered partner. So you can think of someone you are living together in a loving relationship with, and maybe you are married. It is also unmarried children under the age of 21. This is different from the family reunification when it's under the age of 18. Now it's under the age of 21. And it can be other family members. It can be children over 21 or maybe grandparents and so on. But you need a financial dependency. I cannot explain today exactly what that is because it's complicated, it's individual, and it's hard to prove and obtain the right of residence this way. But when we talk about the core family, as Umi talked about before, then that's the partner, and it's unmarried children under the age of 21. You, of course, and if the EU citizens have the right of residence, they are actually in a marriage with this person, or this is the children of that EU citizen, then they also have the right even if they are not EU citizens. And they have it from the day that they meet the requirements. Then you can apply for a card to prove that you have this right. And as I said, this card can be for 5 years, but you can lose the right. For example, if the EU citizen, let's say he or she is from Italy, moves back to Italy, and then the family stays in Sweden, then there is no more right of residence. Then you have to follow back to Italy. You cannot stay in Sweden if the move is permanent, because the card you get is not the right. This is a right. This is not the permit. So if anything changes, then you also lose the right. And this is very important. I've seen it before. People get the card. They think now I can be in Sweden for 5 years. Then I can apply for permanent and I can apply for citizenship. No, that is not the case. Only in special circumstances can you keep your right to be in Sweden if your family member who is EU citizen moves from Sweden. For example, if you are divorcing and you started the process in Sweden, that can be one part of it. But so it's very important before the partner moves that you make sure that you know where you can live and where you have the right to live, because otherwise you risk being in Sweden illegally for many years, which is, as I said, illegal. And that is this part, and we will take some questions, and I can see them here on my screen. And unfortunately, we will have to choose between the questions because we can't go too long over time, but
just for our sake,
exactly,
give us 20 minutes so that we can.
Can parents take
yeah.
their kids back to homeland and live with the grandmother? That is a question that the parents themselves have to discuss, I think. So it's hard for us to answer that question. Can you change your lawyer if you feel he or she is not helping the case? So if it's a private case and you are paying for the lawyer, you have the right to choose a lawyer. You have the right to say to the lawyer, now I want you to stop and I will go to another lawyer. You have what we call in Swedish fri advokatvalet. So it's a free choice of lawyer and it cannot be questioned. Yes, you can change if it's private. If it is a lawyer paid for by the state, that being asylum case, as Umid explained detailed before, being a criminal case, being a case of custody or not custody, sorry, of compulsory care, LVU of children, then you might have to explain why you want to change lawyer. Why are you not satisfied? Why do you want to change? And it's not guaranteed that you will have the right to change. Institution with asylum cases.
There's a lot of other
this question regarding deportation, unfortunately, we will not be able to answer because it's about human rights and it would need a long explanation to explain detention and expulsion and human rights.
Yeah, please try ask more general questions and not specific ones based on your
How
case.
long does it take for a working permit to be out? Or I think basically the person wants to know how long
the handling time
the
from the
handling
migration
time,
agency.
exactly.
I mean, it's very hard to say. It depends in which country you apply from, but I would say everything from 5-6 months up to a year and a half. It's not impossible. Work permit, yeah.
Yeah, it depends. It can be as low as 1 month, but then you need to be certified. Now this fast track system is changing, so that is a question that will change in the couple of months that is coming, and it's hard to explain during a meeting like this, unfortunately.
But in general, at least 4 or 5 months, up to a year and a half is quite normal.
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah.
Are the rules for moving as a long-term resident in the EU the same as moving as a citizen of another European country? No, it is not the same. You don't have the same right as someone who is a citizen of the European Union. It is always good for you to become a citizen if you can, but it is kind of looking the same, but it is not exactly the same, but you have some of the rights that the European Union citizens have, but not the same.
Does PhD studies qualify you to apply for a permanent residence in Sweden? That is if you are studying your...
We're going to talk about permit for studies shortly, but permanent permit in Sweden, you need to, it depends on what sort of permit you have, how long you have had it, but in general you need income, steady income, and you must prove that you have this income for a period of time. So a permanent permit in Sweden at this time is mostly based on your employment and income.
Yeah, you need the income, you need to be able to support yourself. You, of course, need to have had the permit for the right amount of time. And as Umid said, that is different depending on the permit you have. And we will actually not go over the rules for permanent residency today because
there's just no time.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I think we must move on.
We must move on. Study visa, we will not take that for now. It comes later. let's see if we have one more. No, so no more questions regarding this. So we will move over to the next part, which Umar will take care of.
Somebody have a quick question here. I think that was before regarding student residence permit. What role or advantage does the question, do you have a relative in Sweden, play?
So we're going to talk about resident permit for studies now, and we shall see if it answers your question, and if not, we can circle back to it. Yes. So, but residence permit for studies, this is also an application that must be made from your home country, and you need to receive the permit before you move to Sweden and start studying. So shortly about the process, before you apply with the Swedish Migration Agency, you need to apply and receive admission from a university. So basically, at least a university in Sweden must have accepted your application to start studying there before you can make an application with the migration agency. But when you have received an admission decision, it is good to apply with the migration agency as early as possible, because there is a long handling time. There's a lot of people applying to come to Sweden to study. So as soon as you have received an admission decision, it's good that you look into if you should apply for the permit or not. When you apply for the permit, it is also important not to forget to pay the tuition fee. If the tuition fee is not paid, this could be a reason to reject your application. And the application itself can be made on the migration agency website. Yes, but a few words about the requirements. So to be able to obtain this permit, as I said, you apply from your home country and receive the decision before you come into Sweden. You need to have admission decision from a university, so at least one university who agrees that you can come here and study. You need to have a valid passport, and as we said earlier, the time left on the passport needs to be for the period of time that the permit is going to be granted. So at least 2 year time left on the passport is important. Otherwise, your permit might be less than that. In some cases, or in a lot of cases, you need to have full covering insurance. Some universities have insurances as well, and when you pay tuition, you get that as well. But if your university does not provide insurance, then you need to have this yourself. You need to prove that you have sufficient funds for the period of time that you are going to study here. And you need to show that you have a minimum of 9,450 Swedish crowns per month. And the way you prove this is by bank statements, where you show how much savings you have, basically.
And just one thing regarding the bank statements, you might be asked to give them a bank statement for a longer period of time.
Yes.
And if you have some transactions that has been made just before the application, and they are a lot of money, and you have never had this money before, that can raise some questions from the migration agency.
Yeah. So it is good if you can prove that these funds is something you have raised yourself during a longer period of time. If your family is coming with you, then you need documentation in regards to them, marriage certificate, birth certificate, etc. So we'll not go into detail, but when you apply for study permit, then you can apply for your family to come with you as well. And then, of course, you pay the migration agency application fee. What you should have in mind is that of course, there's a lot of people who apply for different courses or same courses at different universities. But when the migration agency reviews these cases, one of the things they look at is one ground of rejection could be if they believe that the reason you are applying this permit is to come and do something else, to work, for instance, or live, or that you have no intentions to study at said university. And one indication of this could be if you have applied a lot of different courses in different universities. So if in one university you're going to study program X, and then in 3 other universities you have applied for completely different programs, then this could be something that raises questions for the migration agency, and they can call you in for an interview before making a decision in these cases if they have any suspicions. I think this was in short a bit about these sort of permits. So let's circle back to some questions in this part. What was the question you received?
Can we take some few minutes to at least answer all the questions? You don't need to go in details, but at least on the surface to answer.
We can take a few minutes,
questions.
absolutely, but
yes.
not too long.
If you are an SI scholarship holder, I don't know what SI is, but if you are an SI scholarship holder whose study permit is granted for only 1 year for 2-year program, when should you as a student renew your permit?
So you have a 1 year
1 year permit for 2 years.
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Whose study permits only 1 year
for
a 2-year program? Well,
I think it's already answered by somebody, and that is the correct answer anyway.
Before it expires.
Yes.
Basically.
And that is the rule, of course, for every permit.
Yes.
You should never apply even 30 minutes too late, because
it is your responsibility to apply in time. And it's very hard to obtain the permit if you apply too late.
Yeah.
Can a Swedish citizen and married, I think can a Swedish citizen
citizen and married to a national of an African country get a reunification permit? So then I understand that, of course, it's the one who is in Africa or who is of African origin and citizenship that will be applying to come and live with the one who is in Sweden, and not the other way around, of course. And yes, of course, somebody who is a citizen of an African country can, of course, apply to come here and live with his or her family who are Swedish citizens, if you meet the requirement that Umid in detail explained before.
And it should be mentioned, I think the last section of the question is, he is mostly over there. So family reunification, the purpose of that permit is that you want to come to Sweden and live with your family member here. So if you are not living in Sweden, if you receive a permit and then you are mostly outside of Sweden for this 2-year permit time, when it's time to extend the permit, this could be a reason to reject the extension if they believe that you are not intending to live here permanently with your partner.
You will be asked when you have traveled and why, and they will calculate the time you have been outside of Sweden, and there is actually some rules regarding how many months you can be outside Sweden. We cannot go into today.
Yes.
Does a study visa and after study visa count among the 5 years to be considered for permanent residence? What about if you didn't have a personal number but had a coordination number for like 2 years among the 5 years? I don't know if this question regards to the EU.
Does student visa
and
so if you can get long-term residency in Sweden if you have been on a study permit, I believe. This is one of the situations that have to be examined in the individual case. A study permit might be of such a permit that maybe it does not count as one of the 5 years. I will not give you a detailed explanation today because you have to look at the individual case and what the permit was. But a study permit can be one of those permits that does not count as of the 5 years, because the reason is maybe not to live in Sweden, more to study in Sweden for a temporary time.
Are the rules for moving as an EU long resident the same as moving as a citizen of another EU country?
Yeah, that one we asked in the previous
Okay.
section. I think if you go down, you'll have the last questions there.
Oh,
Yeah, we can actually do that. So we will try to answer some questions, but we have to get going. Somebody asked for our details before. Umi's number is not in here, but we can he can say it to you if you want to.
Yeah,
You can write it in the chat maybe.
yes,
Yeah.
and I should know my number by heart, but I do not.
So I will try to look at some questions, but in the meanwhile, while Umid is looking for his phone number, you can see that on the left you have our phone numbers. Of course, if you call me and ask for Umid, I will let him know. Then we have our socials, which is mainly Instagram and TikTok, where we have our names. So it's Johan Namar and Umid Malim. And then we have some apps that we use for communication. I use WhatsApp and Signal. Signal for communication to people in other countries.
And
of
I
course,
also use WhatsApp.
yeah. And that is if you are in another country, or even if you are in Sweden, of course, and you can't call on the regular phone, then you have our emails on the right side. So you can find us by phone, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok, on WhatsApp and on email. We have a question here.
I think we can answer that one.
I think now we can maybe unmute, because you finished with the presentation, right?
Yeah,
If it happens that somebody could not write, but wants to ask a question, we can maybe take.
Okay, we will have to conclude this in 5 minutes, but we can unmute people who cannot write messages, so they can ask their questions now.
Yeah.
When we call or you or send message to you, hope you would not charge us any fee. Did you hear that? Can you explain? When we call or send a message to you, hope you will not charge us any fee.
So we do not charge for you taking contact. For example, you calling us or you messaging us with questions, we will not charge for you doing that. But then if it is something that we need to sit down and discuss and go over in detail, we will of course charge for that time in accordance with an agreement with you, because we cannot give judicial consultation for free, because that's not possible, unfortunately. But we will of course answer your calls, and you will not be charged after a 5-minute phone call if that's not agreed upon.
Which of you is responsible or have a work permit as a specialty?
Both of us work with work permits, but I work a bit more than Umid.
Correct.
All right. When should I do that?
If someone wants to ask a question and can't write, you can raise your hand, and then we can unmute you, for example.
We can take about 5 people, so that it doesn't.
We can take around 5 minutes.
Yeah,
of
5
questions.
minutes. I need to go in at least for 5 minutes.
So we have. I have now. I can't unmute. So I just asked someone to unmute. Yeah. Hi. Hello.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, my name is Tolu Taylor. I am one of the leaders of the African Leaders Forum here in Sweden. People come to us with immigration challenges, and I'm really happy what the Ghanaian Association is doing, and God bless you, and the lawyers will really answer some of the questions. I have one question. One of a sister came to me. She is together with a Swede, I mean, she got a permit from her country, Nigeria, and moved with a Swede. And when they got there were lots of abuse on the spouse's part. Even she had some recorded on video and on her phone. Recently, the migration worker, they wrote to her, and she has like a week to answer the reason why she has to remain in the country. So how does she deal with this kind of a situation? Thank you.
Thank you for the question and for your kind words. So someone who comes to Sweden based on family reunification, and then the relationship ends because reasons that is not that person's fault. For instance, such as this case where she has been abused from the other partner, then this could be a reason for the migration agency to extend the permit anyways. So either when one applies themselves, this is something that needs to be explained to the migration agency, that the relationship is over, but why it is over. And it is good if there is evidence for this, such as a police report or other documentations proving that this sort of incident has occurred, or as in this case where the migration agency has asked her for additional reasons, then this could be a reason that is mentioned, that what the other person has done and any sort of evidence that she has for it. Another reason that is good to provide is you have grown a strong connection to Sweden during this period of time, for instance, through employment or studies. This could be another reason for extensions. There are no guarantees, of course, but it is good to raise these circumstances with the migration agency.
Yeah, because this is a very special situation, and there is actually special rules applying to if someone have been abused, or if someone, so there is special rules for that, and the migration agency has special competence within that. There are also rules as to if you are a part of a criminal case while being in Sweden, and the relationship to residence permit. Now this is an individual case, so we cannot give any guidance on what she or he should do, but we can say that there are rules, and it can be good to talk to a lawyer, because the situation to be in Sweden dependent on someone else, and knowing that if the relationship breaks up, then I have to leave Sweden, gives you a position of a really vulnerable position. So there are special rules. That's what we can say for now.
All right, we could stay here all night answering questions, but I think we need to.
We actually need to finishing up, and maybe we let Nana come into the screen and
conclude the meeting, perhaps.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry for the mess.
No, that's all right. Okay, good evening once again, everybody, and thank you for participating. I hope some of our answers has been answered, and we have learned something from this seminar today. It seems like we will have to actually do a second session of this, because a lot of people couldn't join. We could only take 100 people. The 200 others were at the back, they couldn't join. So I and Yuan and Uma will talk later and see if we'll be able to organize another session for those who were not able to join. Once again, this seminar was being organized by the Ghana National Council of Sweden, and for all Ghanaians, and also for all immigrants in Sweden. Thank you for joining, and see you again very soon. And Yuan.
Thank you.
I just want to take this. But I think they are still